Hello class! A new archetype called Despia has been announced, so I thought I'd discuss and review these cards with you all. The lore of Albaz seems to be continuing with these cards. Be sure to let me know what you think of this new archetype. The first card revealed is a card called Despian of Comedy. It is a level 1 dark attribute fairy type monster with 0 attack and 2000 defense. This card has 2 effects, but you are only allowed to activate one of Despian of Comedy's effects per turn and only once per turn. The first effect is, when your opponent activates a card or effect that targets a face-up Despia card or cards you control, quick effect. You can discard this card or negate that effect. This could be some nice surprise protection, as your opponent might not realize you have this card in your hand. Shame the effect only negates and does not also destroy, but I guess this could be a good thing in some situations. Another downside in my opinion is this negation effect can only be applied in your hand rather than activating both in the hand and on the field, similar to Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit's activation requirements. Another good thing about this first effect is it nicely sets up being able to activate this card's second effect, which I will now discuss. The second effect is, if this card is in your GUI, quick effect, you can tribute one fusion monster, special summon this card. This effect was why I mentioned that it would have been nice if you could also tribute the card while it was on the field, but I guess you can only activate one of the 2 effects anyway, so it's not the end of the world. A point in this effect's favor is it is a quick effect, which is great for versatility for the card, and it's usually a desired feature of a card, which is something I think we can all agree on. Because this is a quick effect, it might work out as good protection for you because you can summon this card in defense position. However, tributing a fusion monster is a little bit restrictive, and the Despian fusion monsters, that we'll discuss later, do not benefit from this effect. Although the Despian fusion monsters may not benefit from this effect, you can tribute the other fusion monsters intended to be played in this deck that work with Fallen of Albaz, for example, Albion the Stigmatika or Titaniclad the Ash Dragon, which do gain effects during the end phase of the turn that were sent to the graveyard. Pro, nice surprise protection. Sets up for graveyard effect. Quick effect, meaning it is versatile and can summon during your opponent's turn. You can tribute the other fusion monsters intended to be played in this deck that work with Fallen of Albaz, for example, Albion the Stigmatika or Titaniclad the Ash Dragon, which gain effects during the end phase of the turn that were sent to the graveyard. Con, doesn't destroy. Protection effect is applied only if this card is in the hand, not on field. Tributing a fusion monster is a little bit restrictive, and the Despian fusion monsters that we'll discuss later do not benefit from this effect. The second card revealed is a card called Despian of Tragedy. It is also a level 1 dark attribute fairy type monster with 400 attack and 400 defense. Similarly to Despian of Comedy, this card has 2 effects, but you're only allowed to activate one of Despian of Tragedy's effects per turn and only once per turn. The first effect is, if this card is sent to the GUI or banished by card effect, you can add one Despian monster from your deck to your hand, except Despia of Tragedy. Let's be honest, a monster searcher is always a nice addition for a deck. The activation requirement for this effect is not all that difficult, as there are multiple simple ways you can do this yourself. For example, Foolish Burial, or using this card as a fusion material, to name a few. The second effect is, you can banish this card from your GUI, then target one Stigmatika spell, trap in your GUI, set it to your field. It's nice recovery. 2 new Stigmatika spells were also announced today, which I'll discuss later, but not only does this card recover these cards, it also recovers 3 previously announced Stigmata spells and traps, Stigmata of White, Stigmata Ominous Scribe, and Judgment of Stigmata. Although activating Despian of Tragedy's effect to banish it from the graveyard to recover a Stigmatika spell or trap counts as being banished by a card effect, remember, you can only activate one of the effects if Despian of Tragedy and only once per turn, so these effects do not stack. But it'd be nice if you could activate both effects. Pro, easy search power. Multiple activation conditions of search power outside of a standard normal summon searcher like Stratos. Good recovery for archetype spells and traps. Con, does not stack with first effect. The third card revealed is a card called Albert, Jester of Despia. It is a level 4 dark attribute fairy type monster with 1800 attack and 0 defense. Also the same as the previous 2 cards, Albert, Jester of Despia has 2 effects, but you're only allowed to activate one of the effects per turn and only once per turn. The first effect is, if this card is normal or special summoned, you can add one Stigmatika spell trap from your deck to your hand. Tragedy recovers the spells and traps, and Albert searches them. Good stuff. The searching not being locked solely behind the normal summon is nice as well. The second effect is, if a face-up fusion monster you control is destroyed by battle or leaves the field by an opponent's card effect while this card is in your GUI, you can affect one effect monster your opponent controls. special summons this card, and if you do, negate that target's effects until the end of this turn. I am not the biggest fan of the activation requirements of this effect, to be honest. It specifically requires a fusion monster on field. This card needs to be in the graveyard, and it relies on your opponent trying to remove your fusion monster. It just seems too situational. Granted, you will be easily summoning fusion monsters in this deck. However, this card would have been better if it wasn't restricted to only being removed by your opponent, because it could then combo well with the other Despia monsters. Pro, easy search power. Additional protection if your opponent is beat sticking their way through. Con, too situational. Too reliant on your opponent for this effect. Last of the main deck monsters announced so far, Dramaturgia of Despian. It is a level 8 dark attribute fairy type monster with 3000 attack and 1500 defense. This card has 2 effects, and unlike the previous Despia monsters, you can activate both of Dramaturgia's effects once per turn each. The first effect is, if a fusion, synchro, xyz, and or link monster is special summoned, you can target one effect monster on the field, negate its effects until the end of this turn. I like this much better than the previous card's negation effect. You have a lot more control over the activation of this effect. Also, it should be noted that the fusion, synchro, xyz, and or link monster summoned by this applies to both players. The second effect is, if this card is used as material for a fusion summon from the hand or field and sent to the graveyard or banished, you can special summon it. Pretty easy special summoning conditions for this card, and great that it is not restricted to the graveyard. In case you're going against cards like Macrocosmos, you'll still be able to special summon this card. The fusion monster you summon by using this card as material will be on field before Dramaturgia is special summoned by this effect, so sadly you will not be able to utilize the first effect with this initial summon. Feel free to summon an additional fusion monster when Dramaturgia is on field, of course. Pro, controllable negation effect. Extra deck summons that trigger this effect not restricted to one player. You can negate your own monster's effects if you want, I guess. Easy summoning conditions. Forgiving conditions can summon itself for graveyard or banish zone. First of the 2 fusion monsters revealed is called Despian Quaeritis. It is a level 8 Night Attribute Fiend type fusion monster with 2500 attack and defense. The fusion materials required for this card are 1 Despia monster plus 1 light or dark monster. You can only use this card's name first and second effects once per turn each. The first effect is, during the main phase quick effect, you can change the attack of all face-up monsters currently on the field to 0, except level 8 or higher fusion monsters until the end of this turn. This effect is basically translating as all monsters have their attack become 0 except the Albas fusions. All monsters, including your monsters. Not ideal, but it can force your opponent into a position of trying to remove this card from your field before the battle phase, which will trigger its second effect. The second effect is, if this face-up card you control leaves the field by an opponent's card effect, you can add to your hand or special summon 1 Despia monster or 1 Fallen of Albas from your deck. This effect won't trigger if this card was destroyed by battle, although the first effect basically nullifies that problem. The main benefit to this effect, in my opinion, is you can summon Fallen of Albas through this, which can basically act like a mini super polymerization, as you can use one of your opponent's monsters as fusion material with Albas. However, I should note that if you do summon Fallen of Albas with this effect, you will not be able to summon a Despian fusion monster with him, as the fusion materials require a Despia monster, and Albas restricts you from using any other monsters you control with the fusion summon of Fallen of Albas' effect, although that point does not apply if your opponent has a Despia monster on their field. Pro, can basically nullify all attacks. Can bait your opponent and pressure them to remove this card. Versatile and adaptable to certain situations you might be in. Can summon Fallen of Albas. Con, attack lowering also applies to your monsters. Can only be applied during the main phase. Restricted to being removed by your opponent's card effect. The second of the 2 fusion monsters revealed is called Despian Proscenium. It is a level 11 Light Attribute Fiend type fusion monster with 3200 attack and defense. The fusion materials required for this card are 1 Despia monster plus 1 light monster plus 1 dark monster. Since both fusions require light or dark monsters, I guess this could open the door to some nifty chaos plays. You can only use this card name's first and second effects once per turn each. The first effect is, during the main phase quick effect, you can target 1 fusion, synchro, xyz, or link monster in your opponent's graveyard. Either banish it or special summon it to your field. If you are choosing to special summon a selected monster with this effect, this could trigger Dramaturgia of Despia's effect, allowing you to negate a monster on the field's effect. Also, this being a quick effect could come in handy. If you don't want to summon the selected card, you can banish it, which could disrupt some of your opponent's plans. The second effect is, when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can inflict damage to them equal to the destroyed monster's original attack or defense, whichever is higher. With a respectable attack of 3200, this isn't a bad effect, as you will likely be destroying multiple monsters by battle with this card over the course of the duel. However, more people will be focusing on this card's first effect. Pro, can help trigger Dramaturgia of Despian. Can disrupt your opponent's plays. Burn damage for your main attacker. Con, no protection. First of the two spells announced is called Despia, the Stigmatika Theater. You can only use this card's name's first and second effects once per turn each. The first effect is, during your main phase, you can fusion summon one level 8 or higher fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field as fusion material. So it's basically polymerization, but just level 8 or higher. Guess it's nice for a fusion deck. Also, it is relatively generic, so you can technically play this in other decks. The second effect is, if a face-up non-fusion fairy monster you control is destroyed by battle or leaves the field by an opponent's card effect, you can target one level 8 or higher fusion monster in your graveyard, special summon it. This is basically implying your main deck Despian monsters, although it can work with other fairy monsters if you're playing a hybrid deck. This can also help trigger Dramaturgia of Despia's effect. Pro, once per turn, polymerization. Relatively generic, can be used by other decks, Dark Lords, Fluffles. Nice floating effect for your Despian monsters. Not restricted to Despian fusion monsters. Con, reliant on your opponent. No protection. The final card I'm going to talk about is called Stigmatika Curtain Rise. You can only use this card name's first and second effects once per turn each. The first effect is, discard one card, then add to your hand or special summon in defense position one Despia monster from your deck. You cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn after this card resolves, except fusion monsters. This can be a -1 in terms of card advantage, but depending on whether or not you summon a Despia searcher with this card, it might balance out. Something I like about this card is you are not restricted in your choice of Despia monsters in terms of level, meaning you can summon Dramaturgia of Despia with this card. The second effect is, if a fusion monster you control would be destroyed by card effect, you can banish this card from your GY instead. I mean, it's protection for you, but it kind of goes against the fusion monster's effects considering Quaeritis basically wants to be destroyed by your opponent, so most of the time it seems like you won't be wanting to activate this protection effect, unless it is for Proscenium or other fusions. Still a nice option to have though. Invoked builds? Pro, not restricted for which level of Despia you can summon. Quick play spell, nice versatility. Protection for you if necessary. Protection applies to all fusions, not just Despian fusions. Con, requires a discard cost. Technically a -1, depending on whether or not you special summon one of the Despia searchers or not. Restricted to only special summoning fusion monsters from your extra deck for the rest of the turn. Protection does not apply to non-fusion Despian monsters. Despian Quaeritis basically wants to be destroyed, but this protection prevents deck destruction, although not mandatory. The other Albaz fusions also kind of like being destroyed, considering their end phase graveyard effects, so it's basically only good for Despian Proscenium. I hope you all enjoyed my opinions on these new cards. They seem okay to me, but you never truly get a full understanding of the deck until you see them in action. Let's watch some duels now and see how it plays. watching today's video. I hope you found it informative and enjoyable, and please let me know what you thought in the comment section below. Class dismissed.